Same old man. Game over. Johnny.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
So serious.
Roll out.
I am Iron Man.
This is a tasty burger.
Welcome to the In Session Film Podcast.
Welcome to this podcast review for February 29th, 2024, and I'm JD Duran.
And I'm Brendan Cassidy. Happy Leap Day, everybody.
Yeah, how about that? It's not every day you get to announce the 29th of February, but here we are.
Yeah, I love this day. I love this day.
It's always
Doesn't
a
happen
lot of
very
fun.
often. Yeah.
Got to
those
enjoy it.
who are born today, divide your age by 4, and that's how old you are. You're a youngin'.
I know. Could have been born 40 years ago, but you're actually 23. I don't know the math. I'm terrible at math. That's not right.
What,
but you
yeah, that's
get
not
what I'm
right. But
saying.
at the same time, what I feel like you're describing there was that movie Jack with Robin Williams.
Yeah. Well, speaking of things that weren't right, we're going to be talking about a movie that we had planned to do like 3 weeks ago.
Oh, yeah.
And
Quite a while
things
ago.
just fell through a couple of different times as we had tried to get together to talk about a couple of movies that had slowly trickled out into theaters. One of those is The Promised Land, starring Mads Mikkelsen, which is a movie that I considered a 2023 release. I got a chance to see this last year, and I think it technically had an awards run.
I think it
last
did.
year.
It didn't reach any type of, I guess, Oscar status, if you want to call it that, because it didn't get nominated for Best Foreign Language Film.
But it was the Danish entry for
Yeah.
international feature.
Yeah, I feel like if we all would have saw this in time, we all would have considered this for 2023. This is kind of one of those that it feels like this one falls into that gray area when we define what a foreign language film is, whether it be like in this case, a 2023 film or a 2024 film, because we would have gotten the chance to see this in time for our 2023 campaign. And we technically did. You're the one that got.
I did.
I
Yeah,
was
I was gonna
late
say.
to the party on this one.
Brendan was late to the party. I did get a chance to see it. I'm not sure about Ryan and Jay. Knowing Ryan, I would have been shocked if he didn't see The Promised Land.
Well,
that
Ryan
man
sees
somehow
everything.
Sees everything.
Yeah, and then somehow goes to watch Oppenheimer like 10 times. So.
Yeah, I don't know how he does it. I think he has, the time travel piece that you see in Harry Potter.
Oh, the
where-
time turner.
the
Yeah,
time
he's got
turner where she can go back to her different classes and stuff, conveniently.
Or
I think that's Ryan.
I think he would prefer if we said he lived within a temporal pincer movement or something
Or
like
maybe
that.
that's what it is. Because otherwise it doesn't make sense. I don't know how he finds the time to watch Oppenheimer 47 times and then also come into the award show having seen everything that came out that year.
Yeah. He's a busy man.
He's a
busy
madman.
Yeah.
But that's why we love Ryan.
Yeah.
So I imagine he did see it as well. So it was very much in contention for me, and for those that were really paying attention to the award show. You did hear the name Mads Mikkelsen. It was mentioned at one point during that episode.
It was. You're right.
So maybe I'll bring that up as we get into The Promised Land.
Yeah.
This is a film based on the 2020 book, The Captain and Anne Barbara, by Ida Jensen. And the story that takes place here is a true story, but it is highly fictionalized.
Yeah.
Highly fictionalized from the little research that I was doing for this film. I did not know anything about this story coming into it. I was very fresh.
I did not either. But yeah, to your point, from what I understand, and prove me wrong if I'm incorrect here, but Ludwig Kalen, who Mads Mikkelsen plays here, is still a real life figure. But the story around his journey, as depicted here, certainly takes some liberties in order to create a certain thematic arc that this story is going for, from what I understand.
Yes, absolutely.
We'll but the generalities are pretty much there.
Absolutely. So The Promised Land, I do think, is still making the rounds in theaters. Depending on where you live, it might still be available. And I imagine within, the next month or so, I feel like that is the rate in which films get to VOD.
Yeah.
It should
Yeah.
land on some streaming service fairly soon, I would imagine.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a
Especially
good point.
for a movie like The Promised Land,
Mm-hmm.
this small little indie foreign film. So,
Mm-hmm.
all right, let's talk about it. This is directed by Nikolaj Arcel, and it stars the aforementioned Mads Mikkelsen, as well as Amanda Collin, Simon Benningerg, Melina Hagberg, Gustav Lind, and a bunch of others that come and go throughout the film. If you're not familiar with The Promised Land, as Brendan just alluded to, it is the story of Ludwig Kalen, who pursues his lifelong dream to make the Heath bring him wealth and honor, just like we all have. It's all of our dreams. To go out into the Heath for wealth and honor.
That sounds like our podcast right there.
Exactly. That is
This
the new
podcast
tagline.
is the promised land right here.
Exactly.
The cinematic promised land.
Yeah, that will be the spin-off podcast, the In Session film, The Promised Land.
I like that.
All right, so let's go ahead and jump into this. I'm very excited. Brendan, what did you think about The Promised Land?
I'm not terribly familiar with filmmaker Nikolaj Arcel, and I do hope we're pronouncing his name right. I have only seen one of his films before, and that was A Royal Affair with Alicia Vikander, which I thought was quite good. I know he made the transition or the attempt at transitioning into Hollywood films with Stephen King's The Dark Tower, which apparently was not very well received. So I guess it's
but that film went through production hell.
I don't know if I count that as one of his films, honestly. And I say that as someone that hasn't seen it, but knowing the way that content is churned out these days, I feel like it's safe to assume that while he was a co-writer and director on that, it's kind of a director for hire job.
Yeah.
And like that was a producer's movie to try and capitalize on a Stephen King story. So I barely count that, but given what I know from not from the Promised Land, but from A Royal Affair, and just how, for lack of a better term, royal that film felt, and how almost old fashioned that it was, I could certainly sense those same sensibilities making their way into The Promised Land. I do think this film is quite good. I like the old fashioned feel to it. It feels almost, even though it's not an American film, it kind of feels old Hollywood in a way that I really kind of appreciated.
Sure.
There's like this sweetness to it, this sincerity to it, the way the film looks, the way it's scored, the way it's captured, the themes of the film that I'm sure we'll talk about what it means to sort of be blinded by nobility, and how that can be kind of that could be someone's like worst thing in many ways. I think that's a really affable notion, at least explored in this way. And primarily because Mads Mikkelsen is quite great here. You mentioned that we did talk about him during our award show, or at least you did. And there's a very good reason for that. I do think he is quite good. So there's a lot that we'll talk about there for sure. I don't think the film is perfect. There are a few things that maybe we'll talk about from a nitpicky standpoint. And I'm genuinely curious what you thought, JD, of Simon Benninger's performance as as I don't even know Deshinkle, the villain here. There's a lot to talk about with that performance. I'll leave it at that. But the film is actually kind of funny. Like, this is actually kind of an amusing film at times, and I think a lot of it is also back to Mads Mikkelsen and just like the way he reacts to certain things. Like, there's like almost like this weird, maybe accidental deadpan nature to him, even despite the obsessive qualities that his character possesses, or that Ludwig possesses. So I do think that was really interesting. So I love the old fashioned feel to it. I think it's a really good film and a really well made film in that regard. So yeah, I think as far as foreign language films in 2023, we talked a lot about how 2023 was kind of, I guess, like it was weak in certain ways when it came to documentaries, but when it came to things like foreign language films, there was a lot to talk about, and this certainly adds to the conversation, even if I didn't see it at that time. Like, I do think it really does pinpoint how great 2023 was when it came to foreign language films in general. This is another additive to that.
Yeah, I really like this film a lot. Really liked it a lot. It's a movie that richly savors in my cinematic palette. It's engrossing as a period piece. The production design, costuming, cinematography, all excellent here. It's often quiet It's methodical. This is a film that takes this time. It's wonderfully introspective. Narratively, it channels its inner Hirokazu Koreda with its familial dynamic.
I was just gonna say there's another makeshift family thing happening here, and
Yes, absolutely. There was something swimming in the waters in 2023. We saw that a couple of different times outside of Koreda himself.
he's not just ghostwriting films for Japan. Now he's ghostwriting films for Denmark.
Also, exactly. Absolutely. And I do love that about this film. And as you noted there, it features a mesmerizing Mads Mikkelsen who is as good as he's ever been. There's so much to love about this film. It's lush and exquisite with its craft and artistic approach.
Yeah.
Admittedly, its larger story is a tale as old as time regarding people's lust for power and how they'll do anything to maintain it, even if that means smothering those who are innocent. And sure, there's nothing new there, but in execution, I think it's handled with incredible diligence, especially with how those power dynamics influence the film's Koreda sensibilities. There's a palpable tension at play when it delves into its political mechanics, something that leads to harrowing brutality at times, and that shouldn't tonally mesh with the film's heartwarming notions on family and togetherness, but it does. Somehow, Nikolaj Arcel finds a way to make that work, and it's incredible to see how the film tiptoes those jarring lines. And while it is a little bit of a dense movie, again, it's going to test your patience at times.
Sure.
But there's something about how the film maneuvers within those riveting waters that I found myself utterly compelled by this film and what it was doing, despite some of its maybe derivative nature in some ways.
Yeah, this gets back into a notion that we always cite on this show. We quote the great Roger Ebert many times, and it's probably getting kind of tired for many of our listeners out there. The idea of
it's always not worth repeating, though.
It is, but
it's worth repeating.
This is another example of a film that doesn't rely on what it's about, but how it's about, because it is a very derivative story. But you can wrap people up in a very derivative story if the characters are interesting, if there's a true like sincerity to it. And this film does have that. The performances are very strong. And you mentioned some of those moments of almost explosive violence. Like there are moments of pretty gratuitous gore happening here. It's maybe that might be a bit extreme, but it almost isn't. Like it's a pretty brutal movie at times.
It gets close.
Yeah. And that could seem gratuitous for the sake of just being gratuitous to shock us. But sometimes when you're this invested in what's happening, you can kind of get away with that. And I think this film does rightfully, I hate to use the word earn, but I might have to use that here. Sometimes a film can rightfully do that if you've done the work to invest the audience. And I think this film does the right kind of work, that when it does veer into explosive violence and when it does get into that territory, you're less bothered by it because it doesn't feel like it's trying to pull you in because of its violence. Like the violence is an afterthought when what really matters is the journey of Ludwig Kalen. And that's what you care about first. Everything else is secondary. And if the brutality is effective, at least for me, it's effective because I was paying attention to Mads Mikkelsen's performance. Like the way he reacts to someone that works on his land being tortured with pots of boiling water. That scene is gratuitous. It's horrific, but it's not horrific because of the torture itself. It's horrific because it's featured from the perspective of a man who's literally torn between two sides of this spectrum. He needs to save face for his own political place in all of this, but he knows what he's doing is humanistically kind of wrong. So there is a moral battle happening there, and that's what adds to the pain of it all. So there's a justification for that kind of violence when it's layered by different things like that. And this film does a good job adding those things to justify where it goes. And like we'll talk about again, Mads Mikkelsen, I think he is truly great here. And he barely speaks. It's actually a pretty quiet role for the most part. So it's another one of those performances we emphasize how acting is all in the eyes. And I think this is another great example of that. It really is a very good performance.
I agree. I love Mikkelsen here, and I think the brilliance of his performance is that it's entirely in the moment. Very
Hmm.
rarely does he allow himself to escape beyond what's in front of him. The only
Hmm.
time we see that is when he's courting, I believe the character's name is Adele,
Hmm.
that we see when he goes to the castle. I want to say that is the character's name. Forgive me if I'm misremembering there. I did see this film like 4 months ago now, 5 months ago. It's been a
And
while.
Adele is the cousin of Deshinkle, who is also
Yes.
destined to marry him, played
Yeah.
by Christine Kujath Thorpe, I believe. No, again,
Yeah. Yeah.
so many apologies if we're mispronouncing these names, but at least
Very
credit where
much so.
credit is due.
Yeah, so the only time we see that in the character is when he's courting Adele, and it gives him a hope that is fantasized as he
Hmm.
talks to her. We very much see that. It's subtle, but you do see the wheels turning. Outside of that, he
Hmm.
is a little volatile, and
Yeah.
it's because he's wholly concerned with what needs to be done
Hmm.
and how he has to do it. And that approach leaves room for some fascinating ambiguity and questions because you can see Ludwig's motivation and pain flickering in his stoicism.
Yeah.
We know he comes from nothing. We know he spent 25 years in the military. But what's driving his ambition? Is
Yeah.
he running from something? Is he looking for some sort of legacy? And cultivating this land is the one thing he can do to leave a mark on his legacy.
Yeah.
Is that it? The film doesn't give us much in terms of an omniscient truth, but we do know there's something there. And I think Mickelson taps into that pain with extraordinary assiduousness. And that, to me, coupled with what you're saying, I think is what makes sense of the violence here. Also,
Yeah.
maybe coupled with the time period and simply how
Yeah.
the norms
It
were.
just fits the vibe. Like in movies like this that take place in this kind of time frame, like they were prone to be a little bit violent. Like that was kind of the thing.
Yeah.
So like I feel like it does have a place here, even aesthetically speaking.
I agree, but I still think beyond the period of it, I think
Hmm.
what's mostly driving that volatility is again this ambiguity that we don't know what's driving his ambition. We
Right.
might have an idea. The film plants seeds of what it could be. Again, after spending all of this time in the military. And even though he was able to achieve a rank that very few were able to, given his background, and
Hmm.
that renders a legacy all on its own. But
Yeah.
is that enough? Because no one
Hmm.
has been able to cultivate this heath.
No.
Nobody. But
Yeah.
he believes he can. So maybe by doing that, he can leave his mark in Danish history in that regard.
Hmm.
And as a result, there's a lot that needs to be done. You have to do it a very specific way. And as
Yeah.
we see throughout the film, he can't do it himself. Others have to get
Hmm.
involved.
Yeah.
And that brings conflict. And yeah, there's times where it gets a little prickly, a little violent as a result of all of that.
Hmm.
And the way Mickelson taps into that in his performance, again, not just the potential for brutality,
Hmm.
or the volatility itself, but how we see the other side of that coin, how warmth and togetherness becomes a part of it as well.
Yeah.
Like those layers in Mickelson, and because he's so quiet, as we've been talking about, very, very stoic here,
Yeah.
yet I still feel like, again, that flickering ambiguity in him, it's as quiet as it is, it also feels like he's out there banging pots and pans with how heavy the wheels are turning
Well,
in the
there's a
character.
density in him, right?
Yeah.
Like he's weighed down by something. Clearly,
Yes.
given his past, and we do learn a little bit about his past as the film progresses, but he clearly has something to prove. The film does a good job kind of emphasizing both the right and the wrong reasons why he would have something to prove. Uh, and that's where that ambiguity I feel like comes from, because there are times you really pity this man and you want the best for him, and then other times you downright hate him. Like it kind of goes back
Yeah.
and forth. There is
You
a
do.
literal
You do.
pendulum, well, maybe not literal, but a metaphorical pendulum and how your allegiance kind of sways with this man. But at the same time, you kind of understand it given the way ranks are treated and the way nobility is treated here, the way land is treated, that just given your status, you can claim land because you have both the money and the status to support it.
Yeah.
And Ludwig here is someone that, as you said, came from nothing. So that gives him something to prove. And he's climbed the ranks as well as he has without that familial legacy to back him up, which kind of makes him an outlier in the way that nobility is treated in this time. So
Yeah.
he feels like he has already proven himself and he has earned the right to prove himself even further. But that also gives him kind of this obsessive quality. So like there is this battle internally here that I think is fascinating. And once again, I think Mads does a great job channeling that. So
Yeah.
like a
Yeah.
great character is one you find yourself liking and hating, sometimes scene by scene in the same movie. And this is another example of that.
Yeah, because the character lives in the moment, which
Yeah.
we see in Mikkelsen's performance for sure. And I also love the pragmatism of the character. There's something about that on its own terms I found gripping here. He's very hands-on with everything he does. He'd do it all himself if he could, but as we noted a moment ago, he can't, so he has to find help, and that leads to some conflict. He isn't the greatest leader of people. That's
No.
a part of it as well. He's
Yeah,
cold
that's
and
fair.
distant. At times, he's straight up belligerent and mean. And it does take some time for him to warm up to Anne, who is a prevalent character here as well. And even with Anmei, there's some obvious conflict with her at first as well before he eventually embraces her as this fatherly figure. There's a lot about him that is alluring. He's this man that has paved his own path. His ambition in the military earned him this rank that very few had achieved, as I noted earlier. And now he wants to cultivate this land, which I think is worth emphasizing again. They stated this several times at the beginning of the film to really make sure we understood it was impossible to foster this land.
He's kind of a pawn in this in some ways.
Yeah. So there's a side of him, to your point, that is earnest and affable, but he's equally prickly and stubborn. And when those paths collide, it leads to some of the most heartbreaking scenes in the film, such as the moment when a village of Germans come to help work the land for Ludwig. But when they see Anmei, and I guess we should emphasize that she is a person of color.
Yeah.
This little girl that becomes involved in the Coretta sensibilities of the film.
Yep.
So when these German villagers, these white German villagers, they see Anmei, their racist beliefs make them draw a line in the sand.
They see her as a curse.
They see her as a curse, and they force Ludwig to choose between them and Anmei. Well, again, to the pragmatism of the character, he needs these people to till the land. There's a lot at stake, and he can't afford to lose the labor. But at the same time, we've seen how much of a beloved father figure he became for Anmei.
Sure.
And he makes this decision that is just rips your heart out. But that's the duality of the character that I think is handled incredibly well here.
Yeah, I think that's where the dynamics of the makeshift family here are the most effective, particularly when it involves Anmei, played really well by Melina Hagberg. Again, hopefully I'm pronouncing that name right. But I think their dynamic is really effective. Admittedly, I think I would have liked to see a little bit more with the Anne Barbara character, played by Amanda Collin. Like, I feel like there was something about I know what it's going for, and I feel like it is mostly there, but there's a bit of a shift that takes place maybe 2/3 of the way through that kind of made that arc feel a little incomplete at that time in the right way. But I think where the film ends, I would have admittedly liked to see a little bit more of that. But I do think from a fatherly, daughterly perspective, where that film or where this film goes is really sweet and really tender. And it kind of rushes along to get to that point, which is kind of what's most effective about it. Like, there is a bit of a time jump that happens in that final act, which is kind of sudden, but that kind of adds to the pain of it. Because like that's kind of how it feels when you have a family like this, and and you're not ready to let something go. It almost feels like you didn't spend enough time with that person, that you want to try and go back and change things. And that's kind of the feeling that the ending here gives, at least with regard to Ludwig's relationship with Anme. I think the way that crystallizes leaves something dangling in the right ways. But I think that's really effective if at least the way I interpreted it.
Yeah, I love all of this stuff with Anme.
Mhm.
And I do want to talk a little further about Anne. Maybe
Okay.
we'll find some disparity there.
Yeah.
However, before we do, I do want to emphasize the script here a little bit. I noted
Mhm.
earlier it's a little bit too dense. And it has this interesting, I don't even know how to describe it. Like it has these interesting slivers that, if at least if you're not familiar with the book, it might
Mhm.
feel a little unexpected.
Mhm.
Because as we're talking about, on one hand, it's about Ludwig and his willingness to cultivate the soil that has
Yeah.
this reputation of being barren and
Right.
unharvestable.
Sure.
That is the nucleus of the film. All of its
Right.
drama and emotion funnels from there.
Yeah.
However, as we've also been talking about, it's about Ludwig's relationship and this
Mhm.
romance that begins to blossom with Anne and how they form a bond with Anne. It's a story of land dispute
Mhm.
and the wealthy doing everything in their power to maintain control. That's one of the slivers. And then suddenly, in the back half of this film, it turns into a rape revenge movie at one
Yeah.
point.
Yeah.
So there is a lot going on here.
There is.
But
I
I will say this. While there is a lot going on, so many historical epics are full of these various chapters and through lines. And I love that its scope is large despite it mostly taking place in one little spot in the Danish countryside. I
Mhm.
think it mostly works because the film isn't interested in going beyond its scope or getting bogged down in exposition. There's really
It's
none of that at all. It's
yeah.
investing in a healthy amount of characters and drama. It didn't need to go any further than it already does, and it takes its time to allow for character development and that emotion to come through. So even though it does sliver off at times, I think because of that development and taking its time, there's maybe more emotion there than there would be otherwise. And I felt like I was
Yeah.
willing to your point earlier, just kind of ride it out. Like just kind
Well,
of see where this goes.
this is where editing is so crucial to a movie
Yeah.
like this. And I do want to call yet another name here. The film is edited by, again, probably going to butcher this name, but I'm going to try anyway. Olivier Bouguet Cote.
Well done.
I
Well done.
tried. I feel like I have to look up this individual because I think I completely butchered that. I also want to see if they've edited anything I've also seen. Oh, they okay. Also an editor on Thelma, Osla, August 31st, Beginners, The Worst Person in the World.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so very
Makes
good
sense
editor.
then.
Very good
Yeah.
well, see, like a movie like this that has a lot of those threads that you're talking about, it's less so about the threads themselves and how you maneuver between them. And sometimes a movie can seem overstuffed and a bit dense if they're not well balanced within each other. But I do feel like with this film, The Promised Land, while there are many layers here, I never found myself thinking that, oh, this feels like another completely different film. Oh, this feels like another completely different film. I actually feel like there's like a sense of synergy between them, and a lot of
Yeah.
it comes down to how character motivations bleed into these different threads. I think there is consistency there.
Yeah.
So like while it is kind of dense in that regard, you're right that each individual pocket, it doesn't spend too much time on that pocket to say something too self-important.
Yeah.
They're building blocks for a grander story, and I do think in that regard the editing here does a good job bringing it all together.
Yeah, I agree. And ultimately, I wanted to bring that up because it does, at least for me, it argues why I love how the film handles the end character for the most part,
Okay,
even though it never loses sight that this is Ludwig's story.
right.
This is his story. So, of course, he's at the center of attention when it comes to every little through line here, whether
Hmm.
it be with Anne herself, or with Anme, or with the German villagers, or this outcast group in the woods, or
Yeah.
the political maneuverings that he has to deal with. He's at the center of it all. However, we do see Anne have her thumbprint in many of these same through lines. Maybe a little bit, more subtle, but she's very much there. We see her at the beginning of the film. We get a couple of scenes with her husband before we find out what happens to him. Again, bringing back the brutality of the film. And the film takes its time. We see them a couple of times interact and have conversations, speaking of Anne and her husband, before that crystallizes and we move to the relationship between her and Ludwig. And then, of course, that also takes its time. As I noted earlier, Ludwig, it takes a few moments for him to warm up to her.
Yeah.
And then when Anme's brought into it, that's a whole nother dynamic. And she's at the center of all of that in many regards. And you see how she's equally helping take care of Anme. She's taking care of Ludwig even when he's treating her belligerently. We could say,
Yeah,
we're being nice about it. And then there's all this stuff we learn about her in the back half of the film, especially in that final act, that admittedly might feel a little contrived. It takes this wild turn that I don't know if you see coming. But
Yeah, I didn't mind it.
Despite the contrivance of it, there's something about her performance and how it tethers to this rough life that she had been living. And it also makes sense going back to her husband at the beginning of the film, that the film, and this is of course why it wants to take liberties, because it wants to offer this gratification at the end to the audience. And it becomes a fantasized in a way that I still appreciate, because again, despite how weird the turn might be, the film had taken its time in allowing us to connect with her.
And I did connect with her in that regard. I think she has her own separate story that's compelling on its own terms. So where it does go at the end, I do agree that I didn't care about the contrivance or even the extremity of it. I felt like, okay, the character work on the page and the performance by once again want to call out her name, Amanda Collin. The performance there did the work to earn where it was going. Like, if there's anything around Anne Barbara that I wish we got a little bit more of, it was really more of the romantic angle between her and Ludwig. I feel like there was a point where the makeshift family stuff was really compelling, and then given where the narrative goes, Anne Barbara is kind of I don't want to say disposed of, but sort of removed from the narrative for a good chunk of time. And I felt like there was something kind of incomplete there, unless that was kind of the point, as if this was really just meant to be sort of a building block relationship for something greater that Ludwig had to chase down many years later in his life. But I felt like there was an opportunity to explore their dynamic a little bit more that I think it wanted to and didn't quite get the chance to do that. I think her story from her perspective on her own terms is very compelling. It's really just like the synergy between them that I guess I needed just a little bit more of, if I'm being honest, because I think their chemistry together as actors and what we see on screen is really good. So it could just be a selfish thing. Like I kind of wanted to see the three of them, this makeshift family here, mother, father, and daughter, just spend more time together to kind of like showcase that a little bit more. I don't know. That's more of a me thing, I guess.
Well, I will say, and this is where, having seen this film in early November, I believe it was, is where the conversation gets a little tricky, I think.
It's a little murky at this point now, right?
It's hard for me to speak to that with specificity, because my recollection of it is that the film gave us enough of that relationship to blossom. And the volatility of it, how Anne is a part of it, where the revenge element comes at play, and then what we see after the aftermath of all of that, I think is compelling as well, because it does bring a sense of loneliness, maybe a little sense of urgency between Ludwig and with anime as it relates to Anne. I don't disagree that she does disappear in pockets throughout the film
Mm-hmm.
because of the script and its density
Yeah.
and all of its maneuverings. Admittedly, it's a little sloppy, but the scope of it and all of these through lines are so compelling, and the film takes its time. It's like it wants to be this giant Hollywood blockbuster of yesteryear, especially.
Oh, it feels very like in the vein of like a David Lean or
Exactly.
William Wyler or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, David Lean absolutely came to mind. It's like a huge David Lean movie, but
Mhm.
also it's incredibly methodical
Yeah.
and very introspective. The performances in this film are so antithetical to, let's say, your Oscar performances,
Yeah, that's the thing.
minus
It's not a
Simon Beninger, who
yeah.
we
Well,
can talk
that's the
about.
thing. Yeah, we'll talk about him in a little bit. But it's like it's a big movie, but it's also not that big of a movie.
But it's
It's
also really small.
Yeah. So, but
Yeah.
that's another thing I do really like about it. You make a great point because aesthetically speaking, it feels very big and very old fashioned and very classic. But like emotionally, internally, also musically, we haven't really talked about Dan Romer's score here as
Yeah,
well,
it's
which I
very
think is quite
good.
yeah, it's quite great.
Yeah.
It does have a bit of a contemporary feel, like it is kind of bridging those gaps a little bit, which could be a dangerous thing for any filmmaker to try and do without it feeling too
Mhm.
jarring. But I do think this film kind of balances those influences pretty well. Like it feels very much like a new film, but also a film from yesteryear. And I
Yeah,
like that. I like that about
I
it.
agree.
It was kind of a guilty pleasure for me.
I agree. I found it exhilarating and transportive. I noted earlier that it does have this large scope, but it's also restrained. Its
Yeah.
scope is, it gets to a point where the film is like, we're not going beyond this.
Yeah.
This is as far as we're going. So it has this largeness to it, but rarely do we leave the heath. And if we do leave, we're going to the castle to deal with all of the political dynamics of the film. And
Sure.
that's really our only two locations, despite it having this largeness to it. So like I love how the film is able to tiptoe those lines. And
Hmm.
so I feel like because of that, Anne's involvement here, again, at times is it a little disjointed? Sure. But we
Hmm.
spend so much time with them, and it's slow, it's methodical, it's introspective. And I felt like I was able to connect to the character and and be tethered to the volatility of that relationship, the
Yeah.
heartwarming and tender elements of it, but also the I don't know why I'm still here, regarding
I
Anne and how she
yeah.
puts up with Ludwig at times. I felt fully realized to me.
Okay, and that's fair. And I loved her character on her own terms. And like I said, I like the dynamic between her and Ludwig. Like I think it's there. I just don't know if it's fully completed by the time it
Yeah.
gets to its
And
ending.
and if I was to rewatch this, again, it's been quite a few months, maybe I'd be able to speak to that more thoroughly. But that was my memory of it.
Yeah, and to be fair, it's less of a criticism and more so like you had a chance to go even further with this, and I would have liked to see that.
Yeah.
So maybe it's less of a problem and more of a I like this. This was working so well for me. I could have done with more of
That's
this. Like
fair. Yeah.
it's hard to criticize it as a problem with the film. If there is anything, I guess I can criticize as a legitimate problem with the film, and I don't say it as a problem. I'm still wrestling with this. I don't know if it's a problem or not. Should we talk about Simon Beninger's performance here?
Sure.
Because,
Yeah.
like, he plays, or at least it sounds like he's being told to play the most evil man in Hollywood history. it is, it is
Yeah.
heightened to such a degree. Like, I honestly couldn't believe it.
Yeah.
It is like, you will not forget it. It is like if the goal of that performance was to stand out and to have you remember it and talk about it walking out of the movie, oh gosh, does it succeed? It
Yeah.
absolutely succeeds. Does it work in the context of this movie? I am undecided. Absolutely
Okay.
undecided.
Now, I will say, like, I don't think it's satirical. Like, I don't think he's coming from an Austin Powers movie or anything like that. But in the context of this film, it is a little outlandish. I
Yeah.
don't disagree with that. And the film wants you to like, there's no ambiguity. We are
No.
supposed to feel one way about Frederick,
Mhm.
and his whininess is palpable.
Yeah.
His like every little petty behavior here is heightened to 11.
Mhm.
But I think that is on the page. It's not just
I
in
agree.
Ben and Jerk's performance.
I do agree with that. Yeah, you're right.
So I think he's doing a great job of amping into that, because again, there's this level of gratification we get at the end, and not just with Ludwig, but as we noted earlier with Anne as well. And in order for that gratification to, I guess, come off a certain way or be at a certain level, yeah, you need that performance to maybe be heightened a little bit.
Yeah,
If it goes too far, I understand.
that's what
I
I'm trying to
would
wrestle
empathize
with there.
him. Yeah, I get it. No, I totally get it. I had fun with the character. I thought it was entertaining. I thought it fit the tone of the film very well in that regard, in terms of that gratification that it's going for. And I think it's grounded enough that, again, it doesn't feel like it's coming from an Austin Powers movie.
That's the thing. It's like I couldn't tell if I was supposed to like if the performance was supposed to make me hate him or laugh at him or both or none. It's like
Maybe a
look,
little bit of both.
well, maybe a little bit of both, I guess. There's one scene in particular that I think is meant to be really shocking and horrific that I honestly just found really funny, and it
Okay.
involves what he does to a certain maid.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't want to say too much. It involves a maid and a window, and I just
Uh-huh.
couldn't help but laugh. And I don't know, like that scene in particular, I don't know if that was the response it was going for. And it was like that moment where I realized, okay, is this performance really working in the context of this film? I can't really tell, because at the same time, it's like the heightened nature of that performance is kind of a thematic point with the character. In
Uh-huh.
some ways, it like this is a bad example, but it's also tonally maybe not a bad example. It sort of reminded me of Tom Hulce as Amadeus Mozart in Amadeus,
Okay.
but that's a film
Yeah,
that
I can kind of see it. Yeah.
yeah, but that's a film that was also very tonally in line with that performance. It kind of fit, and it was also like it was sort of about the flamboyant nature of that character and the way he behaved. Like it was sort of dissecting that and deconstructing that. And I think The Promised Land is sort of doing that as well with Deschinkel as a villain here. I don't know if it does it enough to
Yeah.
warrant the heightened. I
Well,
have to
and
be
that's
careful. I have to be careful because I keep saying I don't know because I legitimately I don't know if I like the performance or not yet.
yeah. Well, and that's where, as much as I adore it,
Mhm.
I have to point back to the screenplay,
Okay.
because the way that character is written, especially within the film's power dynamics and its structure,
Hmm.
Frederick is this young man who's been given this responsibility.
Hmm.
And there's a scene later on in the film where we come to find out that all of the lords around him do not respect him at all.
Mm-mm.
They look at him as a child. They treat him as a child. And
Yeah.
if memory serves, they might have even called that directly to his face, "You're a child." And
Yeah. That's
so
fair.
there is this level of him, like this desperation that comes out of the character, because he wants to be respected. He wants to have the same role and the same power as all of the other lords around him. And in order to do that, he he has this conflict with Ludwig in terms of the Heath, and how that how they're both involved in all of that.
Sure.
And also because he's young and petty, yeah, there is this entitlement in the character that you might get from those kinds of characters. In fact, I do think we see that in the scene with the lords. They all kind of carry this facade of, "I'm better than everyone else here."
I like those scenes. Yeah, I really do.
Yes, I do as well. And of course he's trying to thrust some power and all of that over Ludwig, not just, the maids
Mhm.
and everyone else that lives there. And so I do think there's a sense of heightened that has to come with the character because of
Oh,
those
I
power
don't
dynamics.
I don't disagree with that. Yeah, I'm with you.
Yeah,
That needs to be here.
and so I think I find myself arguing for the performance because of what's there on the page. If it might go a little bit beyond at times, and when it does go beyond the page, I think that's because, again, there's a level of gratification the film is going for at the end, and it wants you to loathe this character so that you feel that.
It's so desperate to get us to loathe this character. I think it might go a little bit too far at times, because there are moments where his heightened performance here does genuinely work for me. And it's in more of the simple gestures that I really responded to. It's when Ludwig constantly calls him, again, I don't know if I'm pronouncing this right, but his last name being Schinkel. He calls him Schinkel, and he always corrects him saying De Schinkel. Like he tries to give him this like almost noble title of sorts. He's giving it to himself.
Desperate for that respect.
Yeah. In those little moments, I thought, okay, this is a heightened performance, and it works. It absolutely works. And maybe this is more of a performance thing as to why I'm questioning whether it works in totality with the film. I think when it gets really big and really desperate for that hatred that you're gonna feel for the character, it's doing so much of the work for us that this is gonna sound mean. It almost thinks it's like treating the audience as they're stupid. It's like
I don't think it's doing that. I think if anything, it's because it's going for a certain level of satisfaction at the end, and to make us feel that as powerfully as possible, you really go hard at making this character extremely one note. And the film, I think, does achieve that.
It does.
I think you will.
Does it
feel
achieve
that
it too
gratification.
well? Is I guess the question.
And that's where the film becomes very movie-ish.
Yeah.
And again, a little classic Hollywood in that regard. But I didn't mind that. It's very much taking liberties to offer up this conflict with Ludwig, and I love all the nuances to Ludwig. I mean, as we noted earlier, you love him and you hate him simultaneously. And the film does a great job of giving us that dichotomy in the character. And then when it comes to Frederick, he is extremely one note. But I think what's there on the page, the power dynamics, this desperation for respect, how he himself is undermined, I still find that interesting, even if derivative. Admittedly, that's not a new concept by any stretch of the imagination. But the film does emphasize why and how he feels undermined by the power construct around him.
I wouldn't say he has an arc, but there is
but you understand why he's
there is an
desperate
understanding
for that
there.
respect.
Yeah. If anything, it's where the heightened nature of that performance works and where it doesn't is what I'm still wrestling with.
Yeah.
I will say though, regardless, like Simon Benninger, again, hopefully we're pronouncing that name right. It looks like he's having a ball playing this character. Like if I'm not an actor, but if I were to be an actor, which character from this movie would I want to play? It would probably be De Schinkel, just because it looks like so much fun. The way he heightens it, it seems like he's having a ball. And I at least applaud him for really going for it, whether it works or not, as I'm still undecided there.
Yeah, and I guess that's ultimately the point I was trying to make there, is that it's one note, but I think it plays into what the film's main goals are. It is a little jarring when you compare it to everything that's happening with Ludwig. And again, to reiterate, so much of this film is slow. It's going to test your patience at times.
Yeah. It's not for everyone. It's
very methodical. It's introspective. There's a lot of close-ups. It's quiet. And, I mean, you noted earlier, like Mads Mikkelsen, he might say like 50 words in this whole movie. Now,
I think it is a little more than that, but but at the same time, your point stands. Your point still stands.
Yeah, I mean, this is a movie that's 127 minutes. It's not short by any stretch of the imagination. So I'm definitely being facetious there, but it is a very pragmatic, quiet character, Ludwig that is. Yeah. And he really isn't forced, he doesn't say anything unless he's forced to, is what
Right,
how
right,
I meant
right.
to say that. And I love that about the character. So yeah, it is patient, and you couple that with the Frederick character, and
Who
it
yeah,
can
who
seem
speaks
like they
whenever
come
he's given
from
the opportunity to.
exactly. Like it might seem like those two characters come from different movies, but I think, like, again, it's a magic trick, but I think Nikolaj Arcel, he tiptoes that line, and he finds a way to make that work. And I think it's born out of these two characters simply, one, having different personalities and having very different backgrounds, and find themselves fighting for the same space.
hmm
And so it comes together in this really unique way that takes advantage of the distinctive personalities in both of those characters.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I enjoyed it. Even if it's a little movie-ish at times, it's a little weird, maybe a little jarring,
hmm
but I found myself compelled by it all.
Well, and I will say this: if I didn't make this clear, this is my issue. I actually like that the character himself is one note. Like, I like that.
Yeah.
I do. If there's anything I'm still uncertain about, it is just like the level of heightenedness, if that's even a word, that I'm still kind of wrestling with as to how it fits in with the movie, because I don't think this character needs an arc. In fact, if you were to give this
No.
character an arc and more of an understanding than we get here, that I actually think that's kind of a problem.
Yeah.
I like that contradicts the overall notion that it's going for thematically and emotionally speaking.
Yeah.
So I like that the film establishes right away, yeah, we're not supposed to like this guy, and we're not going to like this guy. That's the goal.
Yeah.
That's the
It
goal.
would- I agree. You make a great point. I want to emphasize that as well, because I've talked about that so many times on this show, where movies will go out of their way to offer some sort of emotional crux or quote unquote nuance to a character that is ultimately going to be disposed, and it feels so disingenuous. I absolutely loathe it. And even though Frederick is ultimately the main antagonist here, it still applies in the sense that if you try to ground that character with some sort of emotional backstory, or, his parents died when he was 5, and so this is why he is this way, that would have come off incredibly disingenuous.
That would have been just cheap. So cheap.
And
Yeah.
and I don't know the character in real, or the real person that he's playing.
Yeah,
I don't
same.
know. That
Same.
could be true. I have no idea. But I love that the film didn't give him an emotional crux, knowing that it was going to pull the rug from him anyway.
Right.
And it just commits to the one notary of him.
The one notary.
because-
Wow. The one notary public.
Yeah. And look, unless the only I guess caveat to that is if you removed all of these other slivers and you just focused on that dichotomy of Frederick and Ludwig, and giving us the emotional complexities of both of those. That could have worked. That we've seen in movies lots of times.
Yeah.
And that can absolutely work. But given this film's goals, and that it wants to also be about Anne, and it wants to have this makeshift family of sorts, and, trying to get the Heath, cultivated and all that sort of stuff, it didn't have time to also give us Frederick and this backstory. And the only way for the film to give us that emotional crux is to shoehorn something in there that ultimately would not have been effective at all.
Well, it's like, I don't even know if I would have wanted that backstory for Deschinkel, even if it had the room to play with it. I just like there are too many other moving parts regarding Ludwig's own story that's not even necessary.
Well, and that's what I mean, because
Yeah.
it's throwing in all these other things.
Exactly. Yeah.
Then to give us that crux would not make any sense here.
Yeah.
And it would have also forced a different performance from Benninger as well, because then he would have had to be heightened but also grounded emotionally. And
That's
there's
challenging.
That's challenging, and also there's not enough room for that here.
No.
So
and to reiterate, I like that he's one note. I
yeah,
really
I
do.
agree. In
yeah.
this case, it's effective. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just the thing I'm wrestling with is the level of one notary.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and
yeah.
And the way, and as I've gotten older, the one thing that I feel like Hollywood has maybe gotten the most accurate is that villains in real life really, truly are mustache twirly.
They're mustache
They really
twirlers.
are.
Yeah.
David Zaslav included. So like, yeah, no, that's, I feel like villains in movies should be less Anton Chigurh and
They should be more
of
man
this guy.
babies.
They
They should be more
should be more man babies because that is true to real life. Just saying.
Oh man, but I mean, no one can touch an Anton Chigurh. There's no one that can
No.
touch it. Yeah, that's a comparison that'll never be made ever again. Because man,
No.
that character, that performance, Javier Bardem.
I know.
Who I still sorry to get sidetracked. I still have Coen Brothers on the brain after all the Coen Brothers talk we had on the main show.
Yeah, no, perfectly understandable. At
Yeah.
any rate, do you have any final thoughts on The Promised Land?
Well, I'll just reiterate once again because I know we mentioned his name briefly, but Dan Romer's score. And for those listening, Dan Romer, composer for Beasts of the Southern Wild, Beasts of No Nation, Luca, one of the best scores for a Disney Pixar film, a studio that's known for some of the best musicalities when it comes to animation nowadays. This guy's a rock star, absolute rock star. And the music here is really good, really good.
I agree. I really liked it a lot as well. I honestly haven't tried. If it's on Spotify, I need to look it up. I haven't even tried to find it yet.
I haven't either,
hope
but
that it is.
I remember being very like invigorated by the music here.
Oh, I agree. No,
yeah.
I remember liking the music. It's in my notes here. Like score, very good.
Yeah.
Like it definitely had an impact. I completely agree. So, yeah, I really liked the music here. Want to emphasize the cinematography and craft of this film. Like the period aesthetics of it are really
good.
great. It's visually gorgeous. We've talked a lot about the characters and the emotion and the structure of the film from a narrative perspective, but the craft here really is great. It's very immersive from a visual perspective.
Right.
And the score certainly amplifies a lot of that as well.
Yep.
So yeah, it's a really well directed film. It's a wonderfully performed film. Again, emphasizing Mads Mikkelsen. And to reiterate the award show this year, I should have noted this in my opening thoughts. I don't know why I didn't, but the reason I mentioned him at this year's award show in my individual awards, I had a category for best overlooked performance. And one of those was Mads Mikkelsen. In hindsight, maybe that's a little unfair because it turns out I thought the film would get more of a release than it did. Clearly, it did not.
It did not. No.
That it might not be fair to put him in that category, but honestly, I wanted to mention him somewhere, and so I threw him on for that list.
Yeah, at least his name was mentioned. So hopefully it provoked people to check out this movie when they're able to.
And Overlook could still qualify in terms of, let's say, the Oscars conversation because he was nowhere to be found.
He was nowhere to be found. The movie was nowhere to be found, even though it was submitted as
It qualified
under consider.
for
Yeah, it
international
would qualify. It
film,
did, yeah, and it wasn't selected, unfortunately. I don't know if I would have selected it personally, but I do think it is a very good film. It was such a competitive year for that specific category.
Incredibly competitive year.
Yeah. That when you get a film like this, that I'd probably give like a solid 3.5 out of 5 on Letterboxd, which is still a very good grade. Like that just goes to show how competitive that it was. Like it's a very good movie.
I think I gave it 4 out of 5 stars.
Okay.
And would hold to that. I think this is a very good movie. I still don't think I would put it in my top 5 for best international feature though either. It's just it was such an insane year for international film in 2023.
It's ridiculous.
It was ridiculous. One of the best in the in-session film era. There's no doubt about it.
I agree.
At any rate, I really like this film a lot. Let us know if you agree or disagree with anything we had to say here. You can leave a comment below if you're watching on YouTube. Hello, everybody. I'll leave a comment. Subscribe to the channel, like the video, all that fun stuff really helps out the show. If you're listening on Apple Podcast or Spotify, rate and review us there as well. And you can reach out to us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can email us incessionfilm@gmail.com. But would definitely love to hear what you all thought of The Promised Land.
Yeah. Hopefully you saw it. And if you haven't seen it, check it out when you get the chance.
Absolutely. All right. I think with all of that said, do you have any Anything else you want to say before we get out of here for this episode?
The In-Session Promised Land. I like the way that rolls off the tongue. New
Yeah.
title for the show. I'm patenting it right now.
There you go. The Promised Land spin-off show coming soon. Really like the film a lot. I don't know if this is still playing. It was here in Miami briefly and then disappeared into the ether. So,
Yeah, it was very quick. I think I had it here in the Philly area, in the Philly suburbs specifically for maybe like a week, and that was about it.
Yeah, I wonder, is there a VOD release date, you think?
That is a great question, because if anyone's listening that's interested in this film now, we should try and look that up.
Yeah, I don't really see anything here. Of course, I'm doing this off the cuff here real fast.
Yeah.
So this says here April 30th. Don't hold me to it. I don't know if that's correct, but this says April 30th in the United States.
Okay.
Yeah, okay, it says here, actually,
I'm seeing here February
the upcoming
23rd.
Blu-ray
Really?
and DVD release date in the U.S. is confirmed to be Tuesday, April 30th. So there you go.
There you go. There's the answer.
There you go. So if you're in the
Well,
United
actually,
States,
wait. I think you can rent this right now.
you can rent it right now. Oh yeah, it says, it was released on VOD in the United States. So yes, it is available.
It is available.
I'm glad we looked this up before we started.
This is the beauty of Letterboxd and the way they join forces with JustWatch.com to.
Oh yeah.
So I'm on their page right now. It's like, you can rent this on Amazon, YouTube, and Apple TV. So it's there.
Well, there
it's
you go. It's available right now. You can go and rent it. Of course, if you're listening to this, you've probably seen it already. But if you haven't, you can rent it and then come back and re-listen to the conversation.
Yeah.
Or at least let us know if you agree or disagree with anything we had to say here. But
Good movie.
there it is.
Good movie.
Good movie. Really enjoyed it a lot. Thanks for listening, everybody. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time on the In Session Film Podcast. Oh, Mads Mikkelsen can never go wrong.
Mads is the man.
He is the best.